last week, let's kind of summarize what we read. Moses last week was our first character that we looked at in our Week Enough to Lead, and we talked about with Moses that it was about frustration. Moses got frustrated a lot, and yet despite the things that frustrated him, he was a great leader, and we talked about all the aspects of that. So Moses has died in the book of Deuteronomy, he's gone, and the next to follow is Joshua. Joshua gets a book named after him, and he's also an individual. And we're going to talk about commitment with Joshua. Then we're going to spend just a couple of moments looking after Joshua at another person who teaches us about burnout. So we're going to talk about commitment and burnout, and this study will just keep on rolling as we look at different things that might make us feel weak, but we're still able to lead. So a quick review of Joshua. I'm just going to talk loud because something's wrong with our sound system. Okay, so real quick look at Joshua. Joshua, he was a spy with Caleb who trusted God. He's one of the ones when they looked at the promised land, it was Joshua and Caleb who said, we can do this. And the other spies said, we can't. And so because of Joshua's faithfulness, he gets to be able to see the promised land. Okay, so Moses dies, and now Joshua becomes the next leader. The people don't have a king. They don't really have an organized kingdom. They don't have a land yet. They have to go and take it. The book of Joshua is about going in and taking that land. And so the whole book of Joshua explores this taking of the promised land, and they have to fight their enemies. And Joshua, if you have to sum them up in one word, it is commitment. In fact, in chapter 1, verses 6 through 9, Joshua reads, be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. So you see right there that Joshua's theme, the theme of the book and the theme of Joshua's life is to be strong and courageous. And then from there, the book takes off, and we see his motivation for mission, his commitment. We see that he's dedicated. The book then begins all these battles. It's a blitzkrieg type kind of book, battle after battle. The most famous, of course, you know what it is. You know the most famous? The walls came tumbling down. Book of Jericho, the Battle of Jericho, where they march around the walls and the walls come tumbling down. That's the most famous of the battles. But all of this shows us this Joshua, who is a very extremely committed person. If you want to spend some time this week reading the book of Joshua, I encourage you to spend the week just looking at it. But Joshua chapter 1 will show you his motivation, which is a commitment level that you quickly see is why God chose him to follow after Moses. And then chapter 2 is the more the cool story where they send some spies in to check things out, and Rahab the prostitute saves them, and then eventually you get into the whole Jericho narrative in chapter 5. That's the cool stuff. But after that, it's battle after battle, and you see the positive nature of this man we call Joshua. So I commend that to you to check out. Now, as you do that, then we're going to move into the book of Judges real quick, and then we're going to do some discussion questions about both of us. Okay, so Joshua is this guy who teaches us about decision making. He shows us commitment. He shows us motivation. In fact, the book ends. I want to read one more passage from you. When you come to the end of the book of Joshua 20. Let's see. Hang on. We get to the end of the book, 24. You see, let's see. Yeah, here we go. So you come to the end of this whole book, and you find that Joshua's he's led the people. He's been faithful. They've won all these battles. It comes to the end, and it's now his time to die, and he's buried in the promised land. And then we have now left we've left this great leadership of a man named Moses and a great leader of a man named Joshua. And so then we come to a turning point in the Hebrew history, and we enter the book of Judges, and we're going to talk about Samson. So if Joshua is this great role model of commitment, Samson is going to be the flip side of the coin of someone who starts out with some commitment, but because he doesn't make the right decisions, he quickly leads to burnout. So let me give you some history, and then we're going to jump into Samson, and then we're going to do some questions about this. Okay, so if you remember your Bible, you know that in the beginning it was a ragtag group of tribes in the book of Genesis. There is a famine in the land. They wind up in protection in Egypt. 400 years later, Moses comes up. He rescues them. He's the great leader. Gets into the promised land, but doesn't go in. He dies. Joshua takes the baton, leads them through all these battles. Now they've won the land, and they are living in the land, and they need leadership because he's dead. And so then we come into the book of Judges, which what we find is that they go through a series of tribal war leaders who will lead them, die, and they get another, die, and they get another. And the whole book of Judges is what I often call the Wild West of the Bible. I mean, these people, one time I did a Bible series and I called it The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Because some of them are really good, some of them are kind of bad, and some of them are really ugly, and some of them are kind of a mix. But they all have potential that God would call them. They all have the ability to be great, but because we're given choice, will we be committed or not, like Joshua? Be strong and be courageous. I mean, one time Joshua talks about how, for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So in Judges, you see some who do that, and some who don't. Now, the other thing about Judges is, the people are wanting a king. And next week we'll talk about that. But this is the time period between the great strong leader and between the king. And so you've got these tribes trying to get along, and you see all the dissension and the battles and the fights. And here's another thing about the book of Judges that I just want to mention to you. And maybe you know this from previous Bible studies we've been in. That in Judges, there's a cycle that they go through. The people will sin against God. They'll face punishment, usually in the form of their enemies coming in and defeating them in battle. They'll cry out to God, God save us. God will rise up a judge who will come in and lead them, rescue them, deliver them. The judge will then live a life. There'll be peace. He'll die. And then, what do? Did they learn their lesson? Did they get better? Nope, they repeat it. They sin, they fall into all this horrible stuff, get defeated by their enemies, cry out to God, get a judge, have peace, he dies or she dies, Deborah was a judge, and the cycle. It's called the sin cycle, and it goes on and on. Which leads us to think for ourselves, just for a moment, we take a little side trip, is that are we like that? We live our lives, and things are good, and then we begin to do something we know that's not right, or we withdraw from our commitment with God, and we're not as committed as Joshua, and suddenly we begin to face obstacles and heartache. We cry out to God, we ask for forgiveness, we repent, and God forgives us, things are going good for a while, and then we just keep repeating bad habits, bad choices. Sometimes we do. Some of our choices we just keep repeating them. It becomes a vicious cycle. Well, that's what you find in Judges. And we could spend weeks on the book, and we've done book studies on it. But I want to talk about one of them. I mean, the most famous is Deborah, Gideon, and Samson. Deborah being a female judge, Gideon with his fleece and trying to find out whether God wants him to do certain things. But Samson is the one that every kid knows, because the stories of Samson, when I was a child, we had these coloring books of Bible stories, and it was always Samson. And he seems like a superhero. He seems like this muscular guy who can do all these great things, although we don't really know that he had muscles. But that's how we envision it. So if you want to learn about Samson, I would encourage you to read Judges 13, 14, 15, and 16 of the book of Judges. Because those books, those chapters really did show us the whole arc and story of this judge. And here's what I want to be careful with as we talk about this. Samson is unusual because he just doesn't seem like the others. Everything about him is so unique and stands out, and he just does not seem at all like these other judges that are called. So let's walk through Samson's life, and then we're going to compare him to Joshua. Okay, so let's think about that. So chapter 13 is the birth story. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. That's chapter 13, verse 1. What we see is the sin cycle, right? I told you about that. So they have sinned, a judge has been called up, they've been rescued, and guess what? Verse 1. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And so now they're being thrown into the hands of the Philistines, and they cry out. So verse 2 is their answer. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. And I mentioned this to y'all one time, several times. The Bible loves baby stories. Whether it's Abraham being too old to have a baby, whether it's Mary being a young woman who is not yet married and is a virgin. Baby stories are all over the Bible, and in this church we love baby stories too. We've had a recent early birth in one of the grandchildren of one of our members, and we have been celebrating as that baby has grown and looked beautiful. And so baby stories are great. So we have this new baby miracle. And the angel of the Lord appeared and says, "You are sterile and childless, but you're going to conceive and have a son." Then he says, "Now see to it that you drink no water, no wine, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hand of the Philistines." So basically, this Nazarite pledge, which existed in these days, was you're going to commit this child to God. And if you're going to commit this child to God, this child's going to do great things, but he's got to follow these certain things. Now quickly, I want to say, the other judges don't have this kind of deal. Deborah doesn't have the same kind of thing, and neither does Gideon, but Samson does. So Samson has this pledge, and what you're going to find in his life is he breaks it all. He breaks all the things, even though he has all this potential and possibility. So we're going to skip down, because there is a lot of great stuff here, but what you see is the miracle birth story. And in verse 24, the woman gave birth to a boy named Samson. He grew, and the Lord blesses him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Manadan between Zorah and Eshtaol. Then verse 14, chapter 14, things get interesting. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I've seen a Philistine woman in Timnah, now get her for me as my wife." Let's pause there for a minute. So you're sitting at home, your son goes out, comes back and says, "I just saw this woman downtown Lynchburg, I want to marry her. I just saw her, I'm going to marry her." You'd probably say, "Son, Sammy, what are you talking about this?" What's even worse is she's a Philistine, which means this is the people that we just read in chapter 13, verse 1, that they wanted to be delivered from. So you see that he wants to marry a girl who is a part of the people who caused the whole problem to start. And we can say, "But she's not like them." And I get all that. You can see how the parents would feel. I'm more bothered by the fact that he sees her and wants to marry her right away. Like some of these shows of The Bachelor and all this kind of stuff you see on TV. That kind of stuff. But his father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people?" Back then they married their relatives a lot. So, can't you go to a family reunion and find cousins and so-and-so? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? I have to say that these are some patient parents, because Samson's behavior over and over is insane, and they keep tolerating and loving him, which is a great lesson in how we love our kids, and they drive us crazy, but we're going to love them. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, but this time they were really on Israel. Now, a lot of people stop me and say, "But wait a minute, it was God's plan." And I get that, but the parents don't know that. The parents just know their son wants to marry the enemy's daughter, who we just met. God, and it's all how we see God's work in history. God is trying to deliver them from the Philistines. And God sees this as a way to stir up the situation to do that. Now, does that mean God wanted him to enter a bad marriage? Not necessarily. But God sees it the way Samson is. He knows what Samson's about to do. And so God's going to use this opportunity to get the thing going that they need delivered from to start with. So, you get into it. Well, anyway, Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring over to them. There used to be lions in this part of the world at that time. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have a young goat, which I think is a funny sentence. He tore the lion apart with his bare hands like he might have a young goat. I don't know anybody who tears goats apart with their bare hands. I couldn't tear a goat apart with my bare hands, but I think it's a funny description used by the writer. I'm thinking, whoa, I would have come up with like tearing a piece of paper or tearing a napkin, but tearing a young goat. I think it's interesting. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he'd done, and he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. I'm glad he liked her. Sometime later, he came back to marry her. He turns aside to look at the lion's carcass, as one would do when you kill a lion, and in it was a swarm of bees and some honey. When he scooped it out with his hands and ate, that's really gross. He's eating outside of the carcass of a lion. I again think Samson's a little unusual. He rejoins his parents. He gives them some. I wonder if he told them where he got it. And they eat it, but he did not tell them that he had taken them up. There you go. He did not take it. So I don't know where my food comes from. But anyway, now his father went down to see the woman, and Samson made a feast there, which was customary for bridegrooms. When he appeared, he was given 30 companions. And then he tells that riddle, and I'm going to sum it up. Basically, the riddle, out of the eater, something to eat, out of the strong, something sweet. Now, who is going to guess this whole lion business? No one could. But on the fourth day, these guys he told the joke to the riddle to go to Samson's wife and say, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. They take riddles pretty serious in this place. But anyway, she threw herself on Samson, said, you hate me, you don't love me, you give my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. He says, I haven't even explained it to my own parents. Why should I explain to you? She cries the whole 7 days. She wears him down. And so he does tell her. And they now know the story. And when they give him the answer, he's mad. And I love the line he uses here. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. And what does Mr. Samson do in frustration? Well, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. And he went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of their belongings, gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle, burning with anger, he went to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to the friends who attended him at the wedding. Now, I know it says the Spirit of the Lord came on him, but it doesn't mean God told him to go do this. It just meant he would have these moments where he would just have strength, and he could do things. And what he does with it is he goes and kills a bunch of people and causes a problem. So I personally think that he's not tracking with God here, but you can interpret how you wish, but it is a bad scene. Then you come into 15, and the story's not over. Now, remember I told you, if Joshua is about commitment, Samson's about burnout. What I mean by that is he's moving fast. He's hot as a flash here. He is not stopping, and he's going from one mess to the next, which is going to lead to some serious bad end. You can't just go from one crisis to the next, one family drama to the next, one this and that. And it's a wonder about us to think about how we live our lives, and are we staying focused on God, and are we living the life that we should? We'll look at verse 1. Later on, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife, as one does. And then you go on a date and take a goat together. I'm going to my wife's room, but her father wouldn't let him go in. I was so sure you thoroughly hated her that I gave her to your friend. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? So basically, I'm here to see my wife. I brought her a goat. Well, I gave her away. Don't you want her younger sister? She's prettier. It's a mess. Samson says, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines, which is the whole purpose, because the Philistines have been oppressing the Hebrews. Which leads me to ask, if God is trying to deliver them like he did before, is this also bad? Yes and no. God is trying to deliver them from the Philistines, but Samson is seeming to blunder his way through this deliverance. He's seeming to botch it, he's seeming to get messy, and it gets a little worse. So we can argue all day what God's plan would have been, but it does become a big situation here. He goes and he catches 300 foxes, which I don't know how you do that, but he catches them, and he puts a torch between the tails, he burns everything up, crops and vineyards, and they went over and did it, and they tell him it's Samson because his wife was given away. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Now we see what kind of people these are. This is serious business. And Samson says, since you've acted like this, I won't stop getting my revenge. Just everything goes on and on. He attacks them, he slaughters them. You can read all about this if you want. Verse 11, the 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave and said, don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? You're making it worse, Samson. You're killing them all. It's going to get worse. And he said, I just did what they did to me. And they say, we've come to tie you up and give you to the Philistines. So his own people are going to get rid of him because they're like, we got to stop this guy. And he's going to cause us too much trouble. And he says, swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves. And they agree. So they tie him up and hand him over, but they promise they won't kill him when they tie him up. So they bound him, tied him up. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. He broke the arms. He finds a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and he kills them all. Kills 1,000 men. Throws away the jawbone. And because he was thirsty, as one would be after slaughtering 1,000 men with a jawbone, he cried out to the Lord, you've given your servant this great victory. Now I may die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. Then God opened up a hollow place of Leah, with its water and drinks, his strength was returned. And Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Now, if it ended here, he would be like all the other judges. He came in, he fought, we would criticize a few things he did, but we'd say, despite it all, he still delivered them from the Philistines. He still could be a decent leader and a little messy, but whatever. But we get into Delilah, chapter 16. And so we see the burnout happening, where he just can't stay on the track. And he gets sidetracked by a beautiful woman. One day Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. And that's a problem. No matter who you are, God is always against that. And he starts out by bad relationship. He didn't learn from it. Goes into a prostitute. And then, after spending the night with her, people find out Samson is here. They move in to kill him. And Samson got up, takes a hold of the city gate, tears it loose, and gets into this battle. You'd think, okay, now he's going to slow down. Stay focused. Stay away from prostitutes. Stay away from women you shouldn't marry. Keep the people strong. Of course, he's supposed to fight the Philistines, but this is not good. A third time he gets into a relationship with a woman. So there's the first woman, the prostitute got into trouble, and now Delilah. In verse 4, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The ruler of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the strength of his great, the power of his secret of his great strength, and how we can overpower him. We're going to pay you. So Delilah says, tell me the secret of your strength to Samson, and how you can tie up and subdue. And he doesn't ask why she's wondering this, but he does lie to her. He says, if anyone ties me up with 7 fresh thongs that have not been dried, I'll be weak. So they bring her 7 thongs, and anyway, they hide in the room. He falls asleep, she ties him up, she says, they're here to get you. He breaks the ropes and takes care of the battle. And she says, you lied to me. Now, at this point, I would think, wouldn't you wonder, like, what just happened? But he never seems to learn. I don't know. He's seduced. And he says, well, I can use new ropes. And so she does the new ropes, and they unhide, and he snaps to them. And then she says, you keep lying to me. He should have said, well, wait a minute, you keep trying to kill me. But anyway, he says, if you weave 7 braids on my head, that will work. But of course it doesn't. And then she says, how can you say I love you when you won't tell me? This is the 3rd time you made a fool of me. And then he finally tells her of that vow he had, that no one should shave his head. He must have this glorious locks of hair. You cannot shave my head. Now he broke all the other ones, but this must have been God's last straw. Because they shave his head, and you know the story. They come in, and he can't fight them. They seize him, they gouge out his eyes, and they take him into shackles. And then, of course, they bring him for sport, and they laugh and mock, but his hair's grown back, and in the middle of this wild party of his enemies, he knocks the pillars down, and the scripture says, Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple, rulers and all the people. Thus he killed many more when he died than when he lived. Okay. Samson has become a child figure for children's Sunday school and vacation Bible school. Isn't it amazing how we teach? Now the way we did it when I was growing up, I don't know about you, we had this big flannel board and put the characters on it, and we did creative editing, and we do that all the time when we teach children things. We did creative editing. We didn't use the word prostitute or seduction. We left out, we toned down the violence a little bit. I do remember a jawbone of a donkey. I do remember him holding a gate, but it was more that Delilah was just getting his secrets out of him, and of course we did the death scene. But when you really read it, it's pretty racy, isn't it? I mean, it's right. It's pretty racy. In the Bible, and I'm not putting it down. This is affirming the Bible, because the Bible tells us real stories. Well, stories about the way real people act. They lie, they cheat, they do bad things, and the Bible holds no punches. It says, look, we're not going to, we glamorize Samson as a superhero. I would have thought he was a hero. But when you read it as an adult with fresh eyes, you see that obviously he has heroic qualities, but he doesn't live up to his potential because he has these flaws. And yes, at the end, he does take down the bad guys, but that really, I don't believe, was the way God wanted this judge's story to end. I think that had he, after that first situation, then led the people into battle with the Philistines and defeated them, just like all the other judges did, or well, not all, but the good ones, if he had done those things, they would have peace, and he would have died, and that would have been, it would have been heroic. But he kept breaking his vows with God, he kept breaking morality, and he kept not using his head. He kept running so hard. I think he's a great example of burnout. He doesn't know his boundaries. He doesn't know what he should, just whatever he thinks he goes with. And in the end, if you look at Joshua, we started out with Joshua. Joshua leads after Moses and takes him through all these battles, isn't perfect, but stays courageous, stays strong, me and my household. and he's able to achieve a total victory over the land. Samson is able to lead them into battle, but in doing so burns himself out with them. You know, Joshua is to live and be old and be buried and look back at the fruits of his labors. Samson wins, but he sure does cause a mess as he wins, and it just burns himself, scorches himself to death. Almost literally, I know this building's going to do. So what do we do with this? How do we take this? All right, so here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, briefly as we wrap up here, I want to talk about what this has to say about us. Joshua is committed, and he's committed because he knows his boundaries, and he knows, he says, me and my household will follow the Lord. He knows what he can and cannot do. He's listening to what God says. He's trying to stay strong. And Samson kind of just goes with emotions, whatever his feelings are. And so, if we're going to make it long haul in life, we've got to take care of ourselves. We've got to take breaks. We've got to have physical care. We've got to have emotional care, mental care. We have to do all of those things. Let's step back from the story a little bit and talk about you and me. I would say to you that all of us, there came a time in our life where we committed to God, to follow God. We were baptized, we joined the church, and we were excited, and we would have said just with Joshua, me and my household will follow the Lord. But like Samson, there are times in our lives where we don't listen to the thing that we've been taught. Samson didn't listen to his parents. He didn't listen to his God. And he did accomplish things, but he could have accomplished so much more, caused less misery, and actually had a longer life if he had just been focused. So I want to throw out three things I would throw out, which is boundaries, pacing, and perspective. And I want to say something about each of those, and we'll kind of wrap up and give you a review for tomorrow, a preview for next week. Boundaries. Boundaries are different than walls. God doesn't call us to build walls. God does call us to build boundaries. A boundary is something that says, hey, I've got to protect myself. I've got to stay clear here. Let me give you an example. Sometimes people have family squabbles. And I knew a family once whose child grew up and became so destructive, so to the point where he was almost criminally dangerous. And so what they had to do, they had to basically forbid him from coming to the house. They had to put up alarm systems. They had to make sure that their safety was there because they were worried. But they loved him, and they told him so. And there was always an open door in the sense that if you get help, if you do the right thing, if you get your life on track, we're always going to be here for you. I've known people who faithfully visit their loved one in prison every single week. And it breaks their hearts. They will not lose their love for that person, but they're not going to equip and enable their drug problem or whatever they're doing that's destroying themselves. I can't tell you how many people that, out of love, think they're doing good by their kids, but they don't let them face their music on various things. And so, Samson, if anybody needed an intervention, it was Samson. But we need boundaries. So, in your relationships with others, if there's a destructive force in your life, you're not going to hate them. You're not going to tell them you hate them. You're not going to be cruel. You're not going to be mean. But you have to have limitations. We need to have limitations in our own lives. And we need to be careful. Second, pacing. Pace your life. Take care of your life. Eat right. Sleep right. Nutritionally. Spend time with your kids and family. I can't tell you how many ministers leave the ministry because they work 90 hours a week. Their children don't ever see them, and their marriages struggle. And they say, well, I'm doing it for God, and I'm serving the church. But God says you're to take care of your family, and you're supposed to take care of those responsibilities you have. So as a pastor, my first priority is to my family. I mean, my wife and children, that's going to come first for me because I have to make sure that my children have me. And so that's important. And then, of course, the church is very high importance to me, and I do all I can as pastor. But also, so that I can be a good pastor, I take time to make sure that I walk and exercise because I won't do this church any good if I drop dead. And so I try to eat right. I eat right most of the time, but I do try to do balance, and I do try to take vacations. And sometimes we leave, and it's not that we don't want to see it, but we need to regather our thoughts and grow. And so, whatever you're doing in life, pace yourself. Life is a marathon, not a sprint. And then finally, perspective. I'll tell you why I think Joshua was good at this. Joshua had a big picture, and Samson saw the small picture. Joshua knew, because he lived with Moses, that there was a big picture at work. God was going to get this land, establish a kingdom, and there was a whole future ahead. So he was a part in the big plan. Samson did not think about the big plan. He wasn't thinking about Moses or Joshua or the future of the Israelites. He was focused on lashing out against those people who made him angry and about getting what he wanted. Now, luckily, while that was going on, he achieved some accomplishments, which was to defeat the Philistines. He's lucky he could even do that. That had to be God totally. But he just, on his own merits, he was a blundering guy. And he couldn't see the big picture around him. And it cost him everything. So my comment to you would be, work on boundaries, folks. Work on boundaries, number one. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Make sure any dysfunctional relationship you have, you're careful. And then you have healthy relationships, people who encourage you and who support you. Secondly, pace yourself. It's a marathon. Take care of yourself. And third, have a perspective. This whole COVID situation has been a rough deal. But you know what? God sees the whole big picture. And God is still at work. All right. Well, I hope those things are helpful. And I hope you can write those words down. Boundaries, pacing, and perspective. And think about them. If you have any comments, you can message me. I hope this video will help you as you watch it at home. Next week, we're going to talk about Hannah. And you say, who is Hannah? Some of you know, some of you don't. So you need to join me because Hannah is going to be our bridge till we get to the Kings. And with Hannah, we'll be talking about her child, who is Samuel, who's going to be the one who's going to then lead us to Saul and David and so on. So we're traveling through these biographical sketches. And next week, we're going to talk about Hannah and her plight and her plea for a child and what that's all about. And if you want to know what we're going to talk about, it's about listening and letting go. When we study Hannah, it's going to be about listening and letting go. So you got two options. You can either look through Joshua and kind of look over Judges this week and to review this study, or you can prepare for next week by looking at Hannah in the Bible. Either way, you can't lose. Some people like to read ahead, some people read after the study. But that's kind of what we've covered. We're going to have a prayer, and then when we go off camera, we're going to do some prayer needs in this room and some updates here. Like I said, Amanda's got some updates on the Facebook page. Check them out. We've got several folks that need our prayers. Looking forward to Sunday and looking forward to worshiping with you. Let's pray. Gracious God, be with us this day as we continue to grow and learn together. We want to be committed like Joshua, but we know the reality is that if we don't take care of ourselves, be responsible, we sure can burn out. So help us. Help us to grow faithfully and healthy. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit we pray.